Elizabeth had once been one of the top Hollywood stars, but after passing 50, her beauty had faded. She could only host a fitness program on television. During a break, Elizabeth wanted to use the restroom, but the women's restroom was under repair, so she walked into the men's restroom instead. There, she heard her boss Harvey storm in angrily. He said that Elizabeth, an old, washed-up actress with no popularity, should be kicked out. He mocked her for thinking she was still her younger self. Then he said he would replace her with a young girl. Harvey's cruel words cut deep into Elizabeth's heart. She looked into the mirror and saw her sagging skin. Even though she felt unwilling, she could do nothing about it. On her way home, she saw her posters being taken down. Distracted, she ended up in a car accident. Fortunately, she was not badly hurt. But even after escaping death, Elizabeth could not smile. Aging made her feel life was worse than death. At the hospital, a young nurse stopped her. He pressed on her spine and told her she was a good candidate. Then he handed her clothes back. She thought nothing of it. But the moment she left, she found something in her pocket. It was a note wrapped around a USB drive. On it were the words, "It changed my life." At that moment, Elizabeth ran into an old classmate, Fred. Though both were no longer young, Fred openly showed his affection. He even told her they should keep in touch. Later, in her empty apartment, Elizabeth's curiosity grew. She opened the USB drive. The video said that by injecting a drug called the substance, her cells would divide and create another version of herself. Younger, more beautiful, more perfect. Elizabeth thought it was nonsense. She turned around and threw the USB into the trash. But human nature always gave in to temptation. Even with only the slightest chance, she was willing to gamble. She followed the address to a small alley. Behind a rolling door, a hidden passage opened. Elizabeth went inside and found a secret room. She used a number to open locker 503. In the first layer of the box was an activating serum for her use only. It could be used only once. The second layer was for the new self. The third layer contained the exchange serum, which had to be used every 7 days to swap bodies. The last layer had nutrient fluid, necessary for survival. The warning read, "You are one." After a short struggle, Elizabeth undressed. She injected the activating serum into her body. The moment it entered, she felt dizzy and fainted. Her back began to writhe, as if something was pushing out. Suddenly, her skin split open, her eyes doubled, and a human-shaped leg forced its way through her back. Soon, a young and stunning girl emerged. Her name was Sue. She had all of Elizabeth's memories, but her body had completely transformed. Looking at her breathtaking figure, Sue felt satisfied. She stitched up Elizabeth's back. Then she began to feed her nutrients. Now, Sue had 7 days to live in this young body, but suddenly she felt dizzy. Blood dripped from her nose. She realized she had not injected the stabilizer. There were 7 bottles, one needed every day. Quickly, she drew stabilizer from Elizabeth's back. Then she injected it into herself. Immediately, she felt refreshed and powerful. Full of confidence, she went to the TV station for an audition. Sue's beauty and charm instantly caught Harvey's attention. He signed her on the spot, planning to turn her into a superstar. With Elizabeth's memories, Sue's experience made her rise fast. She quickly became the brightest new star at the station. Every day she injected a dose of stabilizer. In her spare time, she also cared for Elizabeth. Soon a week had passed. She had to exchange back with Elizabeth. Although she was reluctant, she used the exchange syringe. Their blood began to flow into each other. Suddenly, Sue fainted. Elizabeth opened her eyes again. The pain in her back was unbearable, but looking at the unconscious young version of herself, she felt everything she had done was worth it. When Elizabeth returned to the TV station, Harvey had already packed up her belongings. He could not wait to throw her out, his joy written all over his face. In her aging body, Elizabeth found no excitement in anything anymore. Every week, the suppliers sent her a package, and just like that, Elizabeth drifted through a meaningless week. Then Sue began to take over. Her life was far more exciting than Elizabeth's, and she fully enjoyed her exclusive 7 days. But the sight of Elizabeth lying in the bathtub was too disturbing, so Sue smashed through the bathroom wall, trying to hide Elizabeth inside. The loud noise angered one of the neighbors. Yet when he saw the young and beautiful Sue opening the door, his anger vanished instantly. He even said she could ask for help anytime. After that, Sue dragged Elizabeth into the cramped, dark chamber. She took down Elizabeth's portrait and replaced it with her own. With Harvey's full support, Sue's fame grew rapidly. On the 7th night after work, she invited a young man over to her apartment, but the time for exchange had arrived. Her head throbbed with unbearable pain, and blood poured from her nose. In a panic, she rushed to the chamber. By then, Elizabeth's stabilizers were all used up, but greed pushed Sue to want more time. She broke the rules, drawing another dose of stabilizer from Elizabeth's body and injected it into herself. Revived, she decided to survive the night first. On the 8th day, when they finished the body exchange, Elizabeth stepped out of the chamber. She found the house in chaos, with the young man's helmet and a note saying he would come back in a few days to retrieve it. But then Elizabeth noticed something was wrong. One of her fingers looked lifeless. When she undressed and checked, she realized Sue had broken the rules, stealing extra stabilizer from her body the previous night. She immediately called the supplier, asking if there was any way to recover, but they told her that the other body had stolen her vitality and there was no cure. Furious, Elizabeth demanded why she should pay for Sue's mistakes, but they answered, "You are one. As long as the other body keeps the balance, this would never happen." Still, when Elizabeth saw Sue glowing on TV, even more dazzling than her younger self had ever been, jealousy burned inside her heart. Later, when she went to pick up another package, she realized she was being followed. Her stalker turned out to be the same nurse who had first recommended the substance, but now he was no longer young. The old man revealed that he was the Matrix, while the young nurse was only his other body. He told Elizabeth that their only value now was to keep the other version alive, but the other body kept devouring their life force. Elizabeth was horrified. She quickly ran away. Unfortunately, she bumped into the young man who had once dated Sue. Facing the old and faded Elizabeth, the man had far less patience. This made Elizabeth's heart feel even more unbalanced. To comfort her lonely soul, she searched for the contact of her old classmate Fred. She wanted to try love again. They happily agreed on a meeting place. Elizabeth was full of hope. She dressed herself up beautifully, her confidence restored, ready to meet him. But the moment she saw Sue's youthful, flawless face, she felt unworthy in comparison. She reapplied her makeup again and again, but Sue's image haunted her everywhere. No matter how she tried, she was never satisfied. In the end, she almost drove herself insane. Her date with Fred was left broken and abandoned. 7 days passed again. Elizabeth kept the promise and exchanged with Sue. But during one of Sue's performances, an accident suddenly happened. Terrified, she discovered a large lump bulging on her hip. She quickly pressed it upward with her hand, and after much effort, she pushed the lump all the way to her belly button. Then she shoved her hand inside her navel and started digging. Moments later, she actually pulled something out, a piece of fried chicken. When she returned to the stage, she realized her show had already been canceled. Worried that she would be thrown out of the station again, Sue was surprised when Harvey told her that the ratings of her program had skyrocketed. Now, Sue would host the New Year's Eve show. The news thrilled Sue, but it also made her even more greedy. Instead of following the 7-day rule, she drew 3 extra days of stabilizer from Elizabeth. She didn't switch back until the 10th day. When Elizabeth finally woke up and saw her own appearance, she completely lost her mind. Her half-human, half-ghost-like body left her unable to care for herself. Meanwhile, Sue, glamorous and radiant, had become the center of everyone's attention. The contrast between them was striking. On her show, Sue even mocked Elizabeth's old fitness program, calling it outdated. After all, they didn't belong to the same era. This made Elizabeth furious. She was jealous that Sue had stolen her beauty. When they exchanged again on the 7th day, Sue found the apartment in a total mess. It was Elizabeth's way of showing her anger. By then, the hatred between them could no longer be resolved. In a rage, Sue drew dozens of stabilizer tubes from Elizabeth's body. She lived freely for 3 months. But still, it wasn't enough. 3 months later, when she tried to draw more, the stabilizer had turned dark and murky. It was no longer usable. Panic set in. She hurriedly called the supplier, asking if there was a solution, but it was irreversible. The only way was to switch back, so Elizabeth could supply stabilizer again. Though unwilling, Sue had no choice. She barely managed to revive Elizabeth with a blood tube. But when Elizabeth woke up, her body was already completely decayed. She didn't want anyone to see her in that hideous state. She quickly locked Sue's boyfriend outside the door. Her heart was filled with despair, and only rage remained inside her. Dragging her ruined body into the living room, Elizabeth called the supplier again. She said she wanted to stop. They reminded her that once she stopped, there was no going back. But Elizabeth firmly replied she wanted to stop. The next day, the termination kit arrived. Elizabeth wrapped herself tightly from head to toe. Her neighbor thought she was Sue, but instead, a strange figure walked out. After retrieving the package, she hurried back and pulled Sue out of the chamber. She grabbed the termination serum and injected it into Sue's body. But just before finishing, she remembered her once glorious past that would disappear forever. She stopped in a rush, picked up the blood tube, and tried to wake Sue instead. Sue did wake up, but when she saw Elizabeth's horrifying state, she was terrified. On the ground lay the unfinished termination serum. Sue instantly realized Elizabeth had wanted to erase her. Even though they were one, they were still 2 different consciousnesses. At that moment, Sue snapped completely. With one sudden knee strike, she knocked Elizabeth across the room. The frail Elizabeth could not withstand the blow. She was soon beaten to death. But since they were one body, without Elizabeth's stability, Sue could not survive either. But that night was the New Year's Eve show. No matter what happened, she wanted to die in glory. Yet while Sue was putting on her makeup, she started coughing. To her horror, a tooth popped out. Then a few more front teeth fell as well. Suddenly, she remembered the leftover activating serum at home. Since she was split from Elizabeth, maybe she could also create another other body. So she quickly fled the scene, not wanting anyone to see her in that condition. At home, she injected the very first activating serum into her body. Moments later, she collapsed unconscious. At that moment, she turned from Elizabeth's other body into the new Matrix. But what she didn't expect was that her newly formed other body was grotesque. She had forgotten the activating serum could only be used once. This time, the body that emerged was a fusion of both Sue and Elizabeth, dominated by Elizabeth's essence. Still, she thought about attending the grand show. She dressed herself again in a gown, put on earrings, combed her few thin strands of hair, and even pasted Elizabeth's portrait onto her face. Then she returned to the stage. Everyone thought Sue was planning a surprise for them. As the audience watched with eager anticipation, a monster appeared on stage instead. The sight completely stunned the crowd. Those sitting in the front row were left with lasting psychological scars. Amid their horror, she suddenly exploded on the spot, leaving behind nothing but flesh and blood. Elizabeth could have enjoyed her twilight years peacefully, but because of greed and vanity, she walked straight into destruction.